Tyler here. Today we're just going to go over some knife sharpening basics. I got a couple stones soaking here and one right here, so we'll just kind of start out by talking about different stones. So when it comes to stones in the grit level, there's three different categories they fall into. There's coarse, which is anywhere from roughly 120 grit all the way to 500, 600 range. And then there is medium grit stones, which ranges from, this is a 700, I would call this a low medium, all the way up to 1200, 2000 in some cases might even fall into that. And then you have your fine stones, finisher stones or polishing stones, which go from anywhere from 2,000, maybe 2,500, all the way up. You can take it far. Like there's, 16,000 grit stones. Most often you see 6,000, 8,000, sometimes 10. And then if you want to take it even above that, you can use a strop, which is essentially just a piece of leather, or sometimes they use balsa wood. You can just put some, load them up with diamond compound, whether it's a little spray bottle or some people use diamond paste. So yeah, those are the basics of the three main types of stones. Then you get into brands and stuff. I'm not going to talk about that too much here. This is a Nanawa Chosira stone, really good stone. They cut fast, meaning they sharpen quickly. They remove steel quickly too, so you got to be a little careful. You don't want to shave off more steel than necessary when you're sharpening knives. This is a Suhiro Syrax 700, and then this is an Ohishi combo stone, 1,000 and 6,000. So we talked about stones, so now let's just go over some basic sharpening technique. So today I'm going to be sharpening, this is a Moritaka Aogami Supreme 240 millimeter Gyuto. It's one of my favorite knives for sure. Aogami Super is just such a good knife steel. Okay, I'm gonna move so you guys can see me a little bit better. Okay. So this knife doesn't need too much work, so I'm not gonna start on a low grit stone. You don't really want to use low grits too much unless you have a really dull knife, or if you're setting a bevel, or or if you got to remove chips or do repairs for some reason. I don't use it too often unless I'm sharpening dull knives or, like I said, repairs. So we're going to start out with the Syrax 700. So when you are holding a knife for sharpening, when you're sharpening the right side of the blade, I almost kind of hold it like you would a pinch grip, almost as if you were using the knife. So, I lock my finger right here behind the choil of the knife, pinch it like that, and then I actually, when I'm sharpening, I extend my pointer finger out over the spine. It just gives you good control. And so when you actually put the blade to the stone, a lot of people just talk about angles, and they're like, oh, you're supposed to sharpen at 15 degrees or 12 degrees, 20 degrees. So it really depends. First off, unless you actually have a way to measure angles, you're never gonna perfectly be at, oh, I'm sharpening at 15 degrees the whole way down. There's human error is going to come into play, and you're not going to be able to hold a perfect 15-degree angle every single time you sharpen a knife. So more important, it's just be consistent with your angle throughout the entire sharpening on both sides. Yeah, so I sharpen this at about, I would call that close to 15 degrees. This steel, you can take it even more acute than that if you wanted to, but the more acute angle you sharpen at, the more fragile your edge will be. The trade-off with that is you will end up with more like slicing aggression, like it'll perform a little better, but you know, it's a trade-off. So it really is going to depend on what the knife is used for and what you're expecting to get out. So sharpening the right side of the blade with the grip I just showed you guys, I'm going to go ahead and start real quick. So I usually start out with the tip, and this knife has a pretty flat profile, so I'm going to be doing the push and pull method. Hopefully you'll get to kind of see what I'm doing. I don't have the best camera set up here, so I know this video isn't going to be superb. So I just kind of lay the edge down and I push and I pull. That's where it gets the name push and pull. And the actual angle that the blade is coming into contact with the stone, not the angle I'm sharpening at, but the angle in which the blade and the stone are intersecting at, I usually do about 45 degrees. So if that was 90, creating a 90-degree angle, I usually am about halfway in between that perpendicular angle and then being completely vertical with it. So I feel like that gets you the best results. And another thing you want to make sure of when you're sharpening is that, you know, and this is an argued topic, some people don't flatten their stones. Most people do. When I'm sharpening a bigger knife, I do flatten my stones. You know, when you're sharpening a small knife, like a paring knife or a petty or something, you can kind of work around. You know, as you sharpen stones, you know, they get, you know, you know, you get an uneven surface. I can't think of the word for that right now for some reason. I'm having a brain fart. They dish, that's what it's called. You know, they dish, and you get a lower spot in the center than on the two sides. So this is just a cheap non-wood flattening stone. Some people use, you know, diamond plates, Atoma plates, stuff like that. I don't have one here with my setup today, so I'm just going to be using this. And after flattening, that also gets a nice little slurry built up for you to sharpen with. So let's start again. Okay, so after just a few passes, I'm feeling a burr. You know, this knife was not very dull, so, and a burr is essentially when the metal is starting to, when you're sharpening, metal is going to, stubborn metal, fatigue metal that doesn't want to come off will kind of fold over onto the other side, and that's an indicator of, you know, this side is sharpened enough. So now I'm going to go ahead and flip it, do the left side of the blade, and so my grip for that is essentially the same, but I kind of wrap my hand around the handle a little more, get a better grip, and then instead of this finger being up here, it's going to be down here on the face of the blade. And then same technique pretty much. I start at the tip, holding at about my 15-degree angle, push and pull. And pressure, when it comes to sharpening, some people apply a lot of pressure, some people don't. I don't try to put too much pressure. I feel it can just add some unnecessary like aggression on the stone, and on the blade. So I really don't put very much pressure. And so I know I talked about the 45-degree intersection angle of the blade and the stone. The only time that, like right now, you're going to see me doing some 90-degree sharpening. That's because when you're on the left side of the knife, to get this heel area, you can't get it at that angle, or else you're going to have your handle actually on the stone, which would make it impossible to sharpen. So when you're getting this area, about from there to there, you got to make a 90-degree angle, an intersecting angle with the stone. And so so you see me pulling and pushing. So this stroke right here, when I'm pulling, or it's going to be different in both directions. So there's two kind of strokes. There's edge trailing and edge leading. So when I'm sharpening the left side of the blade, okay, my edge trailing is the edge coming towards me. Edge leading is when I'm pushing it away for me. And kind of a rule of thumb I go by is I try to drop my pressure a little bit on edge leading strokes, because otherwise you can sometimes gouge the edge into the stone, and you can snow plow your stone, which is something we want to avoid. So it's a good technique to use if you're just getting into sharpening. Feeling for a burr. Starting to get a little warm. We'll do one more pass. The tip and the heel of a chef knife or Giotto tend to be the two spots that are most easily missed. So sometimes it's good to take a little bit extra time, and in addition to your normal passes, to spend a little bit of time up there. You don't want to spend too much time in one spot of the knife ever, because you don't want to eat away more steel in one spot than the rest of the knife. So you want to stay pretty consistent, but giving a little bit of extra attention to the heel and tip of the knife is definitely a good idea. Okay, so I got a definite burr. Edge bevel looks good, nice and even. Okay, so now to finish off our work on this stone, I'm going to do a couple strops, which I will show you what that is right now, hopefully. So I essentially put the tip down when I'm doing the right side, and it's just one smooth stroke down the blade. And I try to follow the curvature of the knife and put a little bit of motion. That's going to be different for every knife. So do a couple on that side, and then for the left side stropping, I start heel at the top of the stone, and then as I pull down, I just kind of go over the blade, again trying to follow the curvature of that knife. Luckily this knife's pretty flat. The more curved a knife is going to be, the more difficult it can be to sharpen, especially when you're just starting out, because you gotta work with the curvature of the knife. Otherwise, you run the risk of just not doing a very good sharpening job. Okay, so we got our strops down. Let me go ahead and switch stones real quick. We'll get this video wrapped up. Okay, so this is an Ohishi combo stone, meaning that this is a 1000 grit and that's a 6000 grit. It's essentially two stones laminated together. You get a little more bang for your buck that way, but you do get less. Actually, this example right here, I have pretty much, that's like about maybe a little shorter than that. So you get a little bit of less of each stone, especially the polishing side, but they usually cost about as much as an entire regular stone. I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the water. And when it comes to how long you want to soak your stones for, that is really going to vary on the stone. Some stones are what they call splash and goes. Kind of like my Chaucera over here. I actually do soak that for about 2 minutes before I use it, but essentially a splash and go, you could have the stone completely dry, splash some water on it, and you're good to go. You just got to keep feeding it water as you go. The majority of stones are going to be soaking stones. Some people do what's called perma-soaking, which is essentially where that stone just lives in water pretty much its whole life until it gets taken out to be sharpened with. And you know, that's all going to be what you want to do if you want to go that route, or just soak them before sharpening. I don't perma-soak any stones because once you perma-soak them, I just feel like that's too big of a responsibility to just have a stone constantly in water somewhere, like having to change the water, and I just don't feel like I have time for that. I would just rather soak when I am going to be sharpening. That's easier for me. I don't have to keep changing the water of the stones. And some stones don't hold up to perma-soaking. They'll, you know, depending on how the material is bonded together, sometimes they'll fall apart or crack, or, you know, you can have a number of issues with that. Go ahead and switch sides. I'm going to do a couple strops. Before I move on to another stone, I strop for a number of reasons. It helps remove any burr you have hanging over. Like I wouldn't want to start on a new stone with a pretty severe burr hanging off my edge. So I strop. It kind of lessens the burr a little bit, and it tends, if you have any inconsistencies in angle, if at one point your angle wasn't perfect, with the others. It kind of helps just blend your edge into one nice consistent angle. I mean, obviously if you have a big mess up where you were way off or spent a lot of time being off, it's not going to blend that, but I'm talking little minor mistakes. So now we're on the 6000 grit. This is a polishing stone. It's just going to help refine the edge, polish the edge, and it's going to give us a super sharp, clean knife. Get a little slur going on this. With polishing stones, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of slurry going. This is a Nagura. It's essentially just a little miniature stone. Some people don't like to use them because they say that it contaminates your stone surface with an unknown grit level. I don't know. I haven't noticed any. I don't use it too often. I had a diamond plate, a little mini one that I was getting slurry with originally. I just don't happen to have that here. Left side. Okay, so I have a pretty well polished edge. So anytime I'm finishing a knife off, you know, one thing you got to be wary of as a sharpener is if you leave a burr hanging off your knife, and I'm talking like these things are microscopic, like sometimes to see them you got to use like a microscope or, you know, like a little jeweler's loupe. So I will strop pretty excessively on my finishing stone, go back and forth in equal amounts. Usually I'll go like 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1. I haven't been counting just now while I've been talking, so hopefully that was about even. So we'll do it a little shorter just for video's sake. So we'll go okay. So now go ahead and wipe the knife off. Now, as another trick to deburring, there's a number of things you can use. This here is a felt block. It works pretty well, I find. Some people use cork. There's a number of things. Some people use, some soft wood. And essentially, you just want to go from heel to tip. Just drag it through a couple times. It just helps remove any microscopic, stubborn little metal dust bunnies that are hanging onto there. A couple times. And now, just real quick, last thing, we are going to run it over just a leather strop a couple times. So when I'm doing this, I use my same stropping technique that I showed you guys. So just, same technique I use on this stone. I usually do a progression of 3, 2, 1, or sometimes I do 4, 2, 1, really whatever suits you best. Okay, so now we have a pretty sharp knife. Let me grab a piece of paper. Now, cutting paper, in my opinion, doesn't show a whole lot about an edge. It's not that hard to get a knife sharp enough to cut paper, but just for video's sake. So this is a pretty sharp knife. In fact, I bet, yeah, it's hair popping sharp. I could shave with this knife easy. Cool. So yeah, that was just kind of my take on sharpening basics. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Thanks. See you next time.